all, welcome back to another cozy crime time. I am going to start off with a trigger warning about today's case. There will be talk of sexual liberties with things other than people. Um, so I apologize in advance. This case truly brings to light the question of nature versus nurture. Can how you are raised truly affect how you will be later in life? What happens when your crimes are also overshadowed by bigger things going on in the country around you at the time? How many second chances is too many second chances? All these questions are going to come up while I talk about today's case, and there are so many disturbing factors in it. So let's dive right into a man who spent way too long being way too gross before becoming the worst person I've read about recently. Robert Garrow was born in Dannemora, New York, which is close to the New York-Canada border. He was born March 4th, 1936, to Robert and Margaret Garrow. He was one of 6 children in the French-Canadian family, though the family only raised 4 of the 6 in the home. The oldest child of the family had been given away at birth, and another child had died early in life. The family was poor farmers, and so life was not very easy for them. The children had a very strict upbringing with very little socialization to the world, and there was no education at all. When talking about his family, he would say how his father was an abusive alcoholic, and his mother was described as a violent, cruel person without any compassion. She would beat her children with whatever she could find, such as a belt, a brick, or a crowbar. She knocked him unconscious on multiple occasions, and she just didn't care. His sister would go on later to corroborate his story and how their upbringing really was. Due to the family's financial issues, Robert was sent to work at a neighbor's farm when he was 7 years old. He remained at the farm until he was about 15, and working at this farm made his isolation increase exponentially. At around 10 years of age, he began to have sexual intercourse with the farm animals, and he even would begin to use the milking machines to masturbate. His life was escalating out of control at this point, and he really began to butt heads with his father. He would go on to beat him so terribly when he was 15 years old that the family had to send him to reform school. After spending 1 year in reform school at the age of 16, he was released. He then went on to enlist in the United States Air Force, and his time in the Air Force wasn't any better. Robert had hidden from the world that he had been bedwetting since a very young age, but he was unable to hide this when he was in the Air Force. And it brought tons of ridicule from his fellow airmen. He ended up being court-martialed after stealing money from his sergeant, and for this crime he was sentenced to 6 months in prison in Florida. While he was there, he tried to escape, and he ended up having another year added to his sentence. Once his sentence was served, he was released and discharged from the Air Force, and he returned home to upstate New York in 1957. And he just wanted to begin his life again. Once he returned home, he worked very menial jobs, all of which he was fired from, and he did go on to get married to a local girl named Edith. They had a son together, and they ended up moving to Albany, New York. While they were in Albany, Robert got a job at a fast food restaurant, but that didn't last long either because he was caught burglarizing his job, and he was subsequently arrested and put into prison. During his marriage, he also admitted that he was in a sexually sadistic relationship with a male attorney that he had met, and he stated that he was abused in this relationship. In 1961 came very quickly for Robert, and this is when his trouble really started. He was arrested and he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years, but only spent 8 years in Clinton Correctional Facility for the rape of a teenage girl. He would go on to claim that he was abused by multiple prisoners during this time, and the abuse, however, did not keep him on the straight and narrow. You would think if you're sitting in prison and you're being abused in prison and you don't like it, you'd be like, I never want to go back to prison. Let me straighten up. Let me do better with my life. I'm going to be a better person. But not for Robert. He was released from prison and he began a job at a local bakery. He would later state that during this time, he continued to rape young girls all over Syracuse, New York. These rapes were apparently not caught, and he continued his life like this from his 1968 release date until 1972, when he was finally arrested again for unlawful imprisonment and drug violations. He had been arrested for tying up 2 college students, but when it came to pressing charges, the girls decided not to go forward with the charges. This was 1972, so coming forward about any sexual assault or anything like that was not really heard of. Again, we did talk about that in another case, that it was very hush-hush at that time. So these girls probably backed out for that reason. I don't know for sure, I'm just speculating. In 1973, he was arrested again for the rape of 2 young girls, and he was bailed out. So he was arrested again for rape charges. He was already in jail once for rape charges. And this time, for some reason, they bailed him out. But again, we have to look at the time and date, like the time of this situation. So it's the 1970s. In the 1970s, there was no communication between different police parties. So his original crime was in Albany, and now he's in Syracuse. So the Albany police and the Syracuse police don't know about each other and like the charges that he had already had against him. So the Syracuse police were going on the fact that this was, his first offense, because they're not aware of his offenses in Albany. So July 11th, 1973, the day before his scheduled court date, Robert was driving in Syracuse near the Syracuse University, where he spotted 16-year-old Alicia Hawk hitchhiking home from school. He picked her up, he took her behind his apartment, and he raped her. When she tried to escape, he stabbed her to death and disposed of her body in the Oakwood Cemetery. At this point, no one knew that she was missing. And when his parole officer had spotted him near the school, Robert was warned to leave the area, as it was not good for his parole. Robert, to no surprise, did not show up to court the next day. An official arrest warrant was issued for Robert, and he was being charged with sexual abuse, attempted rape, unlawful imprisonment, as well as many others. July 14th, after 3 days as an official fugitive, Robert came across Daniel Porter and his girlfriend, Suzanne Petz. Robert tied Daniel to a tree at their campsite in Waverton, New York, and he stabbed him to death. Daniel was a 22-year-old Harvard student with his whole life ahead of him, just as all of Robert's victims did. Robert then kidnapped Susan and kept her with him for 4 torturous days, where she was repeatedly raped. They were quickly reported as missing, and 6 days later, Daniel's body was found with 4 stab wounds. After killing Susan, he disposed of her body in an airstrip in Mineville, New York. Just 25 miles away from where he had killed Daniel on July 29th, he came across 4 high school friends who were camping. Robert pulled up in his Volkswagen hatchback, walked up to the first tent with his gun in hand, told the teens that he just needed to siphon some gas from their car. He threatened them at gunpoint, and the friends, Phil Dombleski, Carol Ann Malinweski, David Freeman, and Nick Ferolio from Schenectady, New York. Phil told Robert no, that he could not siphon the gas from their car, and as a response, he made the teens walk into the woods, forced them to tie each other to the trees, and he began to slash and stab at them. He ended up stabbing and killing Phil, and the other three got free and ran for help. Once they reached the sheriff, the teens said he'd killed before, and he'll kill again. Robert left the scene and left his car behind. This was a very big mistake on Robert's part, because though they couldn't talk to each other law-wise, they could still run your plates at this time. After the police arrived, they ran the plates and found that it belonged to Robert. Knowing that who the car belonged to, they now showed mugshots to the teens, who picked Robert out. And they said that was the man who had killed Phil and who they escaped from. The police knew exactly who they were looking for now, and the manhunt began. The police went and talked to the family members, who talked about the horrible life they had had growing up. And his wife and 13-year-old son told the police that they had no idea where he was, or if he even took a weapon with him. Police used helicopters in the air and police on the ground to search deep into the woods. But Robert used this to his advantage. He walked parallel to the street, taking food and supplies from hunting cabins in the area. Police were deep into the woods, so he was using the outskirts areas to travel by. Police used a recording of Edith and Robert Jr. to try to lure Robert back in, and this recording said, "Honey, this is Edith. Won't you please come out? Leave your rifle in the woods." Police told people not to go into the Adirondack area, and if they were already there, that they needed to leave immediately. August 2nd, there was a possible sighting, but when the police tried to confirm, the man ran into the woods. The Adirondacks is a huge camping and hiking area in upstate New York, so this was a very busy time for that area. Dogs were brought in and cars were searched. People were told the campsites were closed, and they were using night vision to try to find him at all hours of the day. The search was becoming very intense and very tedious. On August 6th, a car was reported stolen. The vehicle was described as a white two-door hardtop Pontiac with Ohio plates, with bumper stickers reading "Jesus is Peace" and "Teacher." It was stolen from Deerfoot Lodge in the village of Specular, and over 200 deputies, rangers, and state police continued their search. He was considered armed and dangerous, and when the car was supposedly found less than 3 miles from his sister's home, the search quickly moved. A local gas station attendant said that he sold $5 in gas to a man in a Pontiac matching Robert's description. And the small town of Weatherby was terrified. Now, police are in Weatherby. They're searching for Robert. His sister lives there. There's proof that he had bought $5 of gas at the gas station, which today would get you nowhere, but in the 1970s would get you somewhere. And so they just were really unsure of where he was. People were scared. They didn't want to be alone. They were all gathering together. Families were coming together to stay in one place and just to make sure everybody was safe. Robert's lawyer came out and pled with Robert to turn himself in. He offered to help him and knew that he needed help. August 8th, Robert's sister was seen taking food and supplies into the woods, and then Robert was seen by the surveillance team outside of his sister's home. He was told, "Garrow, drop your rifle and put your hands up." This was repeated 3 times before he attempted to flee again. Environmental Conservation Department officer Hilary LeBlanc of Boston Spa shot and apprehended Robert. He was transferred to Plattsville Hospital for 3 gunshot wounds to his upper body. He had a shattered left arm, severely injured ankle, and a shot to his back. The capture was so fast, Garrow never got a shot off if indeed he intended to, the police later stated after the apprehension. In Schenectady, one of the campers from the murder of Phil was still scared for Robert being at large, and they expressed their relief, saying, "With a guy like that, you can't tell what he's going to do." And it's true. You really didn't know what Robert's next move was. You know that whole always keep them guessing? Well, that was Robert. No one really knew what he was going to do next. Robert told the court that the shots from the police had left him paralyzed, and he was now wheelchair bound. I'm sorry, but even if it left you paralyzed, you're still alive, unlike the 4 people that you murdered in cold blood. Doctors contradicted this claim, but he filed a $10 million lawsuit against the state of New York and the hospital for not treating him properly. I'm not sure what happened. I couldn't really find any more about whether or not he won that. I'm assuming he did not win the $10 million suit against New York, but he did file it. During his trial in 1974, Robert confessed to 3 other murders, abductions, and rapes. He had told his lawyer the location of these bodies, but due to attorney-client privilege, he could not tell the courts where they were. So Robert's lawyer knew where these bodies were of these murdered victims. There are 3 families out there who are now not sure what happened. And there are plenty of families who have missing family members who are wondering, well, are these my family members? But because of attorney-client privilege, his lawyer couldn't say anything. He couldn't tell the courts where they were. He couldn't disclose any information, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But I understand that attorney-client privilege is there for a reason. The fact that he did not and could not tell anyone where these bodies were located or anything like that caused an outrage for so many. These families would never have any closure, and one of his lawyers was actually indicted for not telling where the bodies were buried. He was exonerated, again, due to client attorney privilege. Like, he can't by law tell. Robert was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, and he began his prison sentence at Clinton Correctional Facility. You know, second time there, I guess. Winner this time. But he was later transferred in 1978 to Fishkill Facility, and this is a facility for elderly and disabled inmates. So it's a lower security prison because they're elderly and disabled. And not long after being moved to Fishkill, his son, Robert Jr., would start to visit him. So Robert's coming to visit. He's spending time with his dad. You know, not sure that I would want my son around his dad if his dad was a convicted rapist and murderer, but that's neither here nor there. So his son starts visiting him. He's spending time with him. Everything's great. Well, one day, his son brings a bucket of fried chicken. And in my mind, all I can think is this kid walking in with like the pig bucket of like KFC chicken and being like, oh, my dad wanted some fried chicken, you know? And because it's a lower security area, it's for the elderly and disabled, they're like, okay, bring your chicken in, you know? Well, the chicken comes in, but in with the chicken at the very bottom of the bucket was a gun that had been smuggled in with the chicken. Because, you know, I guess they didn't check the bucket of chicken for contraband, thinking nobody would bring that. But I'm assuming that Robert Jr. had been visiting him for a while and was able to understand that they would not be checking to make sure that there was gun in this bucket of chicken. So he gets the bucket of chicken, he gets the gun, and he uses this gun to escape the prison. He gets up out of his wheelchair that he doesn't need because he's not paralyzed, and he takes the gun and he escapes the prison. Well, this goes to continue another 3-day long manhunt for Robert. Robert is off in the wind again. And you know, he's good at these manhunts. He's good at hiding. He's good at making sure he's concealed. He's good at this. So 3 days later, he is found. Well, when he is found, he decides to try to shoot his way out, I guess. But the police, they shot him back. Like, protecting yourself, you know, that's what the police do. If you're going to shoot, they're going to shoot back. So they shoot back and they kill Robert Garrow. They then bring his body in to make sure it's autopsied and confirm that he is deceased. And this ended the life and mayhem of Robert Garrow. This man's crimes may not be remembered at all due to the fact that during his spree of terror, Watergate was unfolding for the rest of the country. So the rest of the country, it wasn't like Ted Bundy or anyone like that, because there was a bigger national news story happening. So Watergate was unfolding. All of that was happening. And Robert Garrow is in the back, you know, killing and raping people. But for people in the Adirondacks, they remember this. He will never be forgotten. And this was a terrible, terrible time for them. It is something that will always be remembered by the people who had to go through it. He ruined and ended too many lives way too soon for no other reason than just because he could. These poor victims and their families lost everything. And our thoughts go out to all those affected by this terrible, heartless, and selfish man. I feel very terrible for their families. But again, like I said in the beginning, were his actions due to the nature versus nurture of life? He was brought up in an abusive, terrible home where he had to fight and scrimp and everything to get where he was. He started his life fighting for his life. So had his upbringing been different, would this have been different? Would this have even happened? And was he given too many second chances? I think the answer to that is yes. I think that if you commit a terrible crime and there are witnesses and there are people who can say, yes, you did this, you shouldn't, like, he raped multiple young women and was still free on the streets. Again, some of that does come with the times, because in the 1970s, there was no communication between the different police forces as there is now with all the computer data and everything like that. But at the same time, I definitely think that he got off easy with his first conviction and he was given way too many chances. But that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to say, any thoughts, please leave them down in the comment section below. I truly appreciate all of you for being here and for listening to me talk. I will be here later this week, hopefully. And again, thank you all for your support. Y'all have a great week. Stay safe. Eat your veggies, drink your water, and just be amazing. All right. Bye.